on how travel can improve a citizen. My name is Mr. Lasser, and I had the honor of being Ms. Wesson's senior thesis advisor. Joining me on her panel are Mr. Alvarez and Ms. Grunwald. If you've never been to a senior thesis before, let me let you in on how this goes. Ms. Wesson is going to start us off with a little speech detailing the contents of her paper, the books she chose, why she chose them. She'll come back to the table. We'll get to ask questions and discuss her ideas for about 45 minutes. The last 10 minutes of the hour is reserved so that you, the audience, can ask questions. So grab out a pen and paper, take some notes, and we'll get started. Before we begin, please make sure your cell phones, if they are not being used to record this, are turned all the way off. And if you need to come and go, please do so as quietly as possible so you don't disturb Ms. Wesson. Over to you.
Malawi is the sixth poorest country in the world. It is the only one in the top 10 poorest countries that did not put itself there by engaging in some type of war. It is a small country in southeastern Africa, nicknamed the warm heart of Africa. In 2015, I spent 3 weeks there that changed my life. Before the end of my freshman year, I had just decided to submit an application to go to Malawi on a mission trip with my church. Little did I know that my application would be accepted, and in a few months I would be on a plane for 22 plus hours, flying across the Atlantic Ocean and the whole African continent. I knew seeing a different part of the world would change my view, but I didn't know how much. Many people asked me to describe what it was like when I was there, and it was difficult for me to put into words. I can describe to you the experiences I had, but not the feeling. I could tell you that I worked at an orphanage that provides uniforms and food for children to go to school. I can tell them that my team and I, with the help of local villagers, built 2 play structures and that we witnessed some kids experiencing their first swing on a swing set. This is going to sound so cliche, and you've probably already heard me say it before, but the laughter and joy that these children and people experience on a daily basis living in such harsh conditions is unfathomable. Visiting the slums on the first day in Malawi opened my eyes to a lot of things. We saw a 15-year-old girl that was now the head of her household because her mother had died of AIDS and her father was never around. She worked doing whatever she could around the slums to be able to support her younger siblings. So when my friend Nathan and I met them, we decided to do the least we could: chores. The first chore was washing dishes, which I can assure you, I can do. But before we could wash the dishes, we had to get water from the nearby well. So we went to pick up the bucket and get the water, but we couldn't get the well to work. As we stood there struggling to get the water out of the well, a group of kids surrounded us and started laughing, teasing, and making fun of us because we'd never done a job like this in our whole lives. The bucket of water, once full, was too heavy for Nathan or I to carry. These kids, the one teasing us, were the same kids that were in the child-headed home. Well, after that encounter, I began to wonder what could make someone feel this intense amount of joy living in these conditions, when it seemed that I wasn't even content living in the conditions I was in. After returning home, this question stayed at the front of my mind. I began to wonder what these kids could do if they had the education that I had, or if they had a mentor to look up to, or someone looking out for them. I realized that those kids would be the ones to change the world. Those kids would be the ones to make everyone feel accepted, loved, and make sure they had food on their tables. My eyes had been opened to the harsh poverty in our world, and I knew I wanted to do something about it, but I didn't know quite what. Then, as the time came to have meetings with Miss Hager junior year, all I could think about was how I wanted to help those people that I'd met. So at the end of junior year, when we were given a sheet of paper and had to write down what we were interested in writing our thesis on, I wrote equality in government, because this is how I thought I could help these people. But Mr. Lasser didn't know what he was getting himself into, because I realized we can help these kids by changing ourselves first. This is why I ended up focusing on the aspect of travel. After my trip to Malawi, the course of my life changed, and I started noticing that travel has also greatly impacted other people that I know. So I wondered if travel changing one's life was an individual effect on me or a general principle. Can some other country completely change your own worldview? After my own personal experience, I decided to see if I could prove that travel could really improve someone as a citizen using classical literature. But that was too broad of a topic, so I decided to focus on improving a citizen in a specific type of society or government. When I was assigned 1984 by George Orwell and Aristotle's Politics, I wasn't sure what to think. What aspect of travel do both of these books have? I thought the answer was none. But after exploring 1984, I realized that it's really about a society in which they don't allow the people to escape, leave, or travel, even within their own minds. The main character, Winston, is tortured by the fact that he can't even think an idea against Big Brother, as they call their government, because the thought police will come after him to imprison and torture him until he believes what the government believes. So I decided to use 1984 as an opposite extreme example of someone who never travels and a society that never changes. This is an example of the danger that can become when you stay in one society your whole life. While reading Aristotle's Politics, I examined the way that Aristotle graded these different types of government. He classifies government in two groups, pure and deviant forms. The pure forms being kingship, aristocracy, and constitutional rule. The deviant forms, tyranny derived from kingship, oligarchy from aristocracy, and democracy from constitutional rule. Aristotle's method of grading governments is valid, but I believe there may be another aspect Aristotle needs to include when grading different governments. He needs to include how different governments treat, encourage, and welcome travelers. After a conversation with Mr. Vaughan, I realized that Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels was an excellent third text to include. I knew nothing about Gulliver's Travels except for watching the movie when I was younger, but after reading the book, it impacted me in a monumental way. Now, on the outside, it may seem like a silly children's story about an English man who travels to a bunch of mythical places and converses with the different types of people he stays there. But in reality, Jonathan Swift is writing a political satire about his own country. After reading Gulliver's Travels, I started to develop my argument. Every place the narrator travels, he examines the government and discusses with someone who is in charge of the society. He also talks about how his travels affected his personal life and his own view of his country. The societies he traveled to include miniature people, giants, a floating rock in the sky, and a country where horses are the most virtuous, intelligent creatures, and the human-looking figures, yahoos, are the animalistic creatures. The last society the narrator visits influences him the most, because he spends most of his time there. His experiences there inspire his writing and thoughts about travel. So I discussed the process that a good traveler would go through when visiting a country as our narrator did. A good traveler would become a better citizen in their own country because they share the virtues they have learned, give feedback to their own society, and become more willing to help their own society after traveling abroad. This process consists of how the traveler reacts to the new society, compares their current experience to past travels, comparing themselves to the new culture they're experiencing, adapting to the new society, applying what they have learned to themselves, and then returning home to share what they have learned while abroad. In concluding my argument, Aristotle's manner of judging cities is correct, but one must also take into consideration societies that encourage, accept, and welcome travelers before deciding which societies are truly best. That being said, this essay should act as a warning for those who decide to stay at home. Next time there is an opportunity to travel somewhere foreign or experience a new culture, embrace it with your arms wide open. This paper urges you to do so. Unless, of course, you would prefer to end up like Winston in 1984, a society in which you are trapped by police that track one's thoughts and the inability to act and want for oneself. All in all, humans need new experiences to grow and thrive. Travel is the best way to do this. Although nowadays travel can be expensive, one must simply make it part of one's journey in the world. Travel must become one of your most important goals. I can assure you, any sacrifice you make is worth it. Whether you go discover small towns all over Europe and learn their ways of life, or you go serve in a third world country, once your eyes are open, they will never be closed again. If you travel correctly, you will not only have an amazing experience, but you can become a better citizen. Before we start, I want to take the time to thank a few people. First, I wanted to thank my mom and dad for their unwavering support in everything that I do. I want to thank Mr. Vaughan, who couldn't be here today, but has always pushed me to define my arguments and make tough decisions while having conversations in humane letters. I also wanted to thank Mr. Lasser for being my advisor and for meeting with me, editing my paper, and discussing my ideas. I wanted to thank Mr. Alvarez for being one of my preceptorial leaders and for being on my panel. And lastly, I wanted to thank Ms. Cronwell for being on my panel today. Her experiences abroad have also inspired some of my own. Thank you.